What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 24 of the Boochcast reviews Darkside of the Ring. And once again, the Booch is riding solo this week. And if you want to know the reasons why, go back and listen to the beginning of the Dynamite Kid episode that we did last week, and you'll know exactly why that is. But anyway, I don't want to waste a lot of time. I'm going to jump right into this. We got a big episode for you guys today. One of the most talked about stories in the history of professional wrestling. You've heard inklings of it in interviews all over the years. Everyone's told their piece on this in some way, shape, or form. But now we get the full story all coming together. And of course, we're talking about the plane ride from hell. This is a great story, and there's nothing else to do but to simply get it started. After a sellout European tour, WWE's top stars and management boarded a private 757 jet in London to return home. Every seat on the plane was a first-class seat. Cost a lot of money, but made it convenient for the talent to travel. And sometimes when wrestlers go overseas, they tend to, accommodate the wrestlers a little bit better. Most of the time when they're flying regularly, they're in coach seats, or sometimes they're in first class seats on a regular airplane. They're booking flights and everything else. But because this was an international tour, they did the private jet thing and flew them around and everything to basically make it so that they don't have to worry about going through TSA. They ain't got to be stuck through metal detectors. All they got to do, grab their shit, get on the plane, and they can fly. Now, what was supposed to be a triumphant flight in decadence descended into a nightmare at 30,000 feet. Mike Chioda says, the party starts when you get on the flights and you just start drinking. But that night, it was just too much. When you have an open bar and you're sitting there for 7 hours, of course things are going to happen. Naked men with robes, guys passing out, drinking, busting each other open, cutting ponytails off. Terry Runnels says the boys are being boys, and I'm not going back there at all. They acted like asses, little children. That's basically it. And a lot of times with wrestlers, here is the harsh reality. A lot of them don't function well in regular society. They're not normal people. Getting into the wrestling business is not normal. It's a very crazy business. Everybody in the wrestling business is crazy. Either you're crazy so you get into the wrestling business, or you get into the wrestling business and the crazy people you have to deal with make you crazy. But sooner or later, everybody in the wrestling business is crazy. The mid-air collision between intoxicated wrestlers and a flight crew determined to prevent an all-out disaster would erupt into one of wrestling's most infamous scandals. Because this shit got made public, and it left a nasty stain on the wrestling business. Worse than anything else that had been done in the past in wrestling. Like, it's worse than, or I wouldn't say not worse, but let's just say a lot of stuff that happened on here became a big part of the speaking out movement that also became a scandal on the wrestling business. Now, people outside the business didn't understand that this was just a normal occurrence for a crazy bunch of wrestlers on a plane. And that's the thing. These guys were behaving the way they would normally behave. Now, to an extent, I can understand that. It's like if you're around a group of friends and that group behaves a certain way and you're either new to the group or you're seeing the group from an outside perspective, some of the things are not going to make sense to you. Like, and I'll use this as an example. On the Boochcast team, if you guys listen to the show long enough, if you've known us longer enough, you know we are very much a ball-busting group. We love to make fun of each other. We love to crack jokes on each other. We give digs and burns. We say a lot of mean shit to each other. In fact, we're so mean to each other that if you saw us out in public, you wouldn't even believe we were friends. You really wouldn't. But to an outsider's perspective, they look at that group and go, what the fuck is wrong with all of you? And it's like, that's just how we are. That's what it was like for this flight crew. They didn't see a bunch of wrestlers having fun. They saw fucking psychos. And to an extent, some of them were fucking psychos. Especially when they've been drinking. Because normal people are crazy when they fucking drink. But wrestlers take that shit to fucking Jedi level. It's why I'll be brutally honest. I don't like being around people who drink a lot. If you're one of those people that has to be drunk to have fun, don't hang out with me. Please don't hang out with me. Because I'm not going to have fun. Because I don't like to be intoxicated. I've done it in the past. If you know me from the regular guys, I've done my fair share of partying. I've done my fair share of being drunk. But here's the thing. When I got drunk, I wasn't an asshole. You know what the worst thing that happened to me was? When I would get drunk, I get sick. I'm the guy with the upset stomach, laying down on a couch or a chair. And I'm burping and farting to make the pain go away to get rid of the indigestion. That's what I do. That's Vinny Bucci drunk. He's not fun. I'm fun for a little while, but eventually I'm gonna get sick. And once I get sick, the fun is over. At least for me. So I don't like being drunk. I rarely ever drink as it is. And I haven't been drunk since 2018. I think was the last time I got drunk. No, I take that back. No, I take that back. 2015 was the last time I got really, really drunk. And that's because I was in New York, and I was hanging out with New York comics. One comic kept buying me beer. And, you know, when you're doing a rite of passage in comedy, a comedian offers you a beer, you take the beer. So I got drunk in New York City. That's the last time I've been intoxicated. Since then, I've had a few drinks here and there, but not enough to be plastered or shit-faced drunk. So, anyway, that's my little rant on that. So, JR says, if I never have to talk about the fucking plane ride from hell again in my life, I would be very happy. Because JR has been asked about this question numerous times in numerous interviews. And obviously, after this episode aired, he got asked a little bit more about it. But JR is now hoping that the whole story's out, that he'll never have to talk about this again. And that's why if I ever get a chance to interview Jim Ross, I won't bring up the plane ride from hell. Unless a fan asks me to. Like, let's say we were doing a live interview and someone in the fans said, ask about the plane ride from hell. I'll say, JR, I don't even want to talk about this, but a fan's asking about it, and I put it on them. That way JR can say, fuck you to the fan if he's tired of talking about it, and not put it on me. Because it's not going to be in the questions I have prepared. By the early 2000s, the WWE is riding a wave of unprecedented success, with a roster of breakout stars and sellout crowds across the world. Business was going really well for the WWE. They were selling tickets, there was high pay-per-view buy rates, everybody was making money. And I can definitely vouch for that because I saw how popular WWE was back then, and it was growing. There might have been some fans who checked out around this time, but let's just say this was the tail end of the Attitude Era and the beginning of the Ruthless Aggression Era. They were still doing very well at this time. You know, this was a lot of big moments were happening here, you know, with WrestleMania 16 on the horizon. You know, the Big Show becoming world champion. Triple H was on his reign of terror with the McMahon-Helmsley regime. The Rock, Undertaker, and Kane were feuding with them. It was getting really, really good. There's a lot of good storylines coming in. And during the surge in popularity, WWE CEO Vince McMahon acquires his competitors, WCW and ECW, consolidating the industry's biggest players into an undisputed monopoly of the wrestling world. The bubble had burst in wrestling. There was literally the WWE and nothing else. So if you wanted to make a full-time living in professional wrestling, it was the only place to be. Now, obviously, with AEW on TNT, and with Tony Khan at the helm, and with everything they've done over the last 2 years they've been in business, obviously they have now become the company to compete with WWE. They are on the cusp, if they're not there already. But during this time, there was nothing. Now, eventually TNA would try to compete with WWE, and they came really close to being the ultimate alternative, but they failed. Now AEW is trying to succeed where they failed. But I remember when WCW went out of business. I didn't remember when ECW went out of business because I didn't really watch ECW in its heyday. The only ECW I've watched is the classic pay-per-views. I've actually seen all of them. We do classic pay-per-view reviews on the Boochcast podcast episode. Now, even though I've seen all the ECW ones, it's been a while since we've done any ECW pay-per-view reviews, but eventually we do plan on circling back to those at some point. We will make that happen. As far as WCW goes, I was the biggest WCW fan on the planet. In fact, during the Monday Night Wars, because back then in the Monday Night Wars, it wasn't like today, where everybody loves everybody and everything and kumbaya, we are the world. No. During that time, you were either WCW or you were WWE. And you did not watch. Very few people watched both shows. Everybody else was one or the other. That's why when WCW went out of business, a lot of WCW fans, they didn't come over to the WWE. They just stopped watching wrestling. They just stopped. And that's why when WCW guys, they were doing the invasion, that's why one of the biggest controversies was when Buff Bagwell and Booker T were the main event of Monday Night Raw in 2001, and they were in Tacoma, Washington. They got booed out of the building. Why? Because it was a WWE town. WCW had never been to Tacoma, Washington. But the following week, they were going to be in Atlanta. So if WWE was smart, they would have held off on that till Atlanta to have the invasion. But instead, they held it in Tacoma, Washington, because they wanted to fuck over the WCW guys. Because, like I said, it was a competition. WWE owned the competition. So now Vince McMahon wanted to embarrass all of WCW's top guys, despite the fact that a lot of them were top guys that deserved to be top guys. And were drawing just as much money, if not more, than some of these WWE fucks. Fact. But because WWE won the war, they got to make the top guys, treated them like mid-carders, and made them roll over and play dead for everyone on their roster. Booker T was one of the few that survived. In fact, the legends didn't get the respect they deserved until many years later. Like nowadays, Goldberg gets the respect he deserves. Diamond Dallas Page gets the respect he deserves for everything they've done in this business. And I'm sure hopefully one day the Steiners will get their respect. But during the early 2000s, they brought them in, but they treated them like shit, even though they were better stars than some of the guys WWE had. And like I said, the holdovers from WCW and ECW were all just trying to find their way in WWE. Like I said, some of them were able to survive. Most of them got screwed over and buried into the ground. Because WWE is, especially Vince McMahon, he's a petty motherfucker. Very petty motherfucker. Anyway, WWE roster exploded in size and stature by securing talent from their former rivals, while also welcoming back returning legends. Yes, that was when Hogan, Hall, and Nash came back. Eventually, like Goldberg came in, but didn't have as good a run. Steiner came in, didn't have as good a run. Rey Mysterio was able to come in. He survived. He was one of the survivors as well. They were able to bring Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig came back, which was great. And as the momentum in the States grew, so did the momentum in the UK. In May 2002, the company travels to Europe for a 4-day tour, concluding with a sold-out pay-per-view in London, WWE Insurrection at Wembley Arena. Now, this is one review we haven't done quite yet, but right around the time this comes out, I'm going to be talking with Gator. We're going to make Insurrection a big part of that to commemorate this. So you're not going to see the links in the description box to go to the Insurrection pay-per-view, but I'll have a pinned comment in the comments section when we do the Insurrection pay-per-view review. So I'm going to put it in the comments section when we inevitably get to it, because we have a lot of other content that we got in the works. But when we do that Insurrection review, you'll see it in the comments section. So some of you who are watching this video now aren't going to see it, but those of you who are watching it, if you're watching it later on, you'll see it in the comments section. So check back here every now and then to see it in the comments section. Or you can listen to the podcast as well, because we'll mention it on there as well. You'll see it in the podcast. So just click on the Anchor or Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcast links. You'll be able to see the episode there. Now, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Brock Lesnar, Just Incredible, Tommy Dreamer, Ric Flair, yeah, I forgot to mention his name, and others were all on this flight. It was a long flight, and they thought that by chartering a customized jet, they were being as talent-friendly as they could. Unfortunately, it didn't work out well. And that's another thing. See, this is a prime example of what happens when you try to be too nice to the wrestlers. See, a lot of wrestlers in the business, a lot of talent, they want to be treated like the talent that they are. That's why a lot of them want the promoters and everybody to pay for their flights and pay for their hotels and put them up in a nice place. And a lot of them have diva-like demands. But here's the thing. It's one thing to have a diva-like demand if you deserve it. But if you're given something special and you fuck it up, not only are you fucking yourself out of a good thing, you're fucking the other people who are behaving themselves on this plane from having a good thing. Because Austin, Taker, the rest of these guys, they weren't causing trouble on this plane. Now, there were some people who were, and we're going to get to who they were. But Austin and Taker, Kevin Nash, they weren't causing any fucking problems on this plane. But they're never going to get this opportunity again because of the other fucking piss ants who screwed this up. And if I'm a wrestler and I'm on the plane and I'm not causing any problems, but if everybody else wants to act like fucking retards and screw it up, rest assured, those people are going to have heat with me in the fucking locker room. Trust me. Everybody that caused trouble on the plane ride from hell should have never won another match in WWE ever again. They should have been jobbing to every single person. That's what I'd do if I was Vince. A lot of these guys would be jobbing the rest of their lives for fucking this up. Next, we cut to Heidi Doyle, who was a flight attendant on the jet. She worked for a company called Sports Jet, which is a private airline that flew many of the different sports teams out of the Phoenix area, such as the Phoenix Suns and the Phoenix Coyotes. They also flew the Utah Jazz and the Mariners. So this is a very big company that likes to fly people in private planes and stuff, and most athletes tend to fly in private planes. Again, they can avoid TSA, they can avoid being accosted in airports, they can just fucking get to where they need to be. Now, a normal commercial Boeing 747 would have 190 seats. This flight had 50 leather seats and bigger carpet than Heidi had ever had in her own house. There's couches and lounge areas. It's just not a very bad way to travel. It's a great way to travel. It costs a lot to do it privately, but you also get many benefits. You can order your own food, so you know what you're going to eat. You know you're all going to be comfortable on the flight. You know you don't have to deal with anybody of the general public on the airplane, which everybody loves, especially me. You're just amongst the group that's your people. Now, that last part for me is all I need to hear, because most people know I fucking hate the general public. So, don't get me wrong. If you're a fan of the Boochcast, I love you. But the rest of the general public, I could do without those motherfuckers. Terry said it was nice to know we weren't going to offend anyone on this flight. Yeah. Because when the boys are on flights and they're a bit obnoxious, it's kind of like, you're going, oh gosh, are we going to go? Sorry. Like they're worried. Well, let's just say Terry thought they weren't going to offend anyone on the flight. And then we had the fucking flight. Now, Terry was sitting in first class with Jim Ross, Vince, and Linda McMahon. The front had a lounge area, so it was kind of like your first class of the first class of the airline. Now, generally, the coaches and the managers sat up there in sports teams. Like the coaches, the managers, the main corporate people would sit in this area, and the players would all sit in the back. They did the same thing here. Vince, Linda, Jim, and Terry sat up front while the wrestlers were in the back. Now, Heidi was in the back with the majority of the wrestlers. Her responsibility in the very back was getting them their drinks and getting their meals out to them. Basically being a flight attendant. She's serving the people. That's her job. They were hungry, and they wanted to try all the different meals that were on the airplane. And yes, wrestlers love to eat, ladies and gentlemen. They have very big appetites. I know this from personal experience, because anytime Buff and I go out to dinner, I get my meal, and it's a decent meal. Buff has plates on plates on plates on plates on plates on plates. Buff is a heavy eater, but he also works out, so he still looks good. But he's definitely a guy who likes to try all the different meals on a plane. I mean, I've never been on an airplane with him, but I just know when we go out to restaurants, he is a big eater. I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that in case people want to know. Now, Ric Flair talked to the flight attendants a lot. He was very chatty, and he was kind of like the captain of the team. He was very nice and personable to them. He was also a little flirty. Ric Flair, a little flirty? Get the fuck out of here. That guy is full on horny little dog. That's exactly what Ric Flair is. Horny little dog that they should have had fixed a long time ago. 99% of the passengers they deal with are men. And Heidi says you just had to be aware of getting too comfortable, because they can always just create a situation that different people can have different thoughts of the level of comfortness. But on the flights to Europe, there's no problems. So they had no problems flying to Europe. All the problems came from flying back. And she's right. Don't get too comfortable, because you don't want them to misread the situation. And you also don't want to mislead anybody. Because obviously, you know, as a woman on a flight, you don't want to be sexually harassed. But you also don't want to be too flirty, because if you lead a guy on, he'll think something's cool. And then when you inevitably push him away, he's going to be like, what the fuck? You was flirting with me over there. That's why you can't be too flirty. Be nice. Be polite. Be professional. You know, you don't have to be a full-on bitch. Just politely excuse yourself from any sexual situation that you don't want to be a part of. Now, if you're a flight attendant who wants to fuck the wrestlers, then by all means, fuck the wrestlers. You know, you shouldn't be shamed for wanting to have a good time with the wrestlers. But if you don't want to fuck the wrestlers, still be polite. Don't be a bitch. But also don't be flirty. Let them know, hey, nothing's going to happen. Be polite. Be firm. And that's all you got to do. Don't be rude. And don't mislead. After an uneventful 8-hour flight across the Atlantic, the charter arrives at its first stop on the tour. Cologne, Germany. The Germans were very into the WWE. And Heidi found it to be an intense, enlightening experience. The flight attendants were with them almost every day. Some came to the show, some were partying at the hotels with the wrestlers, at the bars. In the 80s and 90s, these flight attendants would party with you, hang out with you in the back, drink with you. So yes, like I said, there were some flight attendants who wanted to be involved in the party, and some of them probably fucked some of the wrestlers. Which again, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as it's consensual, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, Heidi enjoyed some of it. Heidi and the other attendants went downstairs and had drinks when the wrestlers came back from the first show in Germany. They chatted with them a little bit that first night. It was her first trip back to work after having a baby. She was enjoying the time, resting in her room, getting to order room service, and not have to wake up at all hours of the night. But she only went to the one show in Germany. And just so I can clarify this, because I don't want people to think I am telling a false story, Heidi hung out with the wrestlers, but obviously did not sleep with them. She did not sleep with any of the wrestlers, but she did hang out and party. She went to that one show in Germany, and then the rest of the time, she sat in the hotel for the other durations of the show. And she's more than welcome to do that. So let me clarify that. When I said that Heidi was involved in the party, she's only involved in the actual party. She did not sleep with anybody. Clarifying that for the record. Anyway, according to Tommy Dreamer, you literally would wrestle in Germany, and the next day you wake up, you're in Scotland. And then you wake up the next day, you're in London. By the time they got to London, everybody was really stoked. The show sold out in 21 minutes, and it was a solid show. The talent was happy with their performances, and they were even happier to get back on the plane and go home. Heidi was excited to get back home to her baby. And I like that. You know, Heidi's a new mom. She loves her kid. But, you know, when you're at home taking care of a baby, you know, eventually at some point, you want to get the fuck out of there. And any parent who says they don't is a liar. You're lying to yourself. If there's not at least one part of you that wants to get away for a little bit. And she did. She was gone for a couple days. After a couple days of, you know, having fun and getting everything out of her system and getting the relaxation she needs, now she can go back home to her baby and be happy to see her because she got some rest. She's not stressed. So we thought. The excitement to return home is quickly deflated as the passengers are delivered troubling news. Everyone takes their seats and they are taxied out onto the tarmac, and they were advised that they were on a weather hold from Connecticut. They assumed the delay would last 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour tops. Turns out the flight was delayed for 7 hours before the plane took off. On commercial airlines, we would all be familiar with the small mini bottles that they serve. You know, those little mini bottles they got. You can just open them up, take a quick drink, whatever. On this flight, they had normal bottles on this plane. Dear God, help us all. Again, if you're going to hang out with wrestlers, don't give them normal sized bottles. There's a lot of alcohol in there, and they will go through that like spring water. Again, you know this. Don't put yourself through this. And they had normal bottles on this plane. The liquor cart quickly ran out of alcohol, and they had to order another one, and they ran through that. Then they ordered a third one, and they ran through that. Heidi had never seen that happen before, and since that time, it has not been allowed by the company since. So now you get one cart, that's it. No more carts after that. They are not going to want a repeat of this, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. And I was said to the wrestlers too. Better hold your liquor. You get one cart. You go through that, that's your fucking problem. Stop acting like fucking savages. That's what they are. Savages, barely even human. So they were basically behaving like a bunch of high school kids after a football game that were trapped in the parking lot with cases and cases of beer. RVD said it's more like the 5th grade. The flight attendants are supposed to serve the drinks, but in this case, the wrestlers served themselves. They pretty much said, move over, bitches, we're getting drunk. JR believes they were celebrating the release of finally going home. They had a small window to let their hair down and become stupid, and that's what a lot of them chose to do. When the plane finally takes off, Heidi realizes they have a lot of drunk people on this plane. Mike Chioda says the boys could get drunk in 1 hour. When you're doing GHB or pills or anything like that, Percocets or Vicodins and stuff that were around, you could do a lot of damage in 1 hour. They had doctor's prescriptions, so there was always a lot of booze and pills in the WWE. And it's not uncommon for wrestlers to be on prescription drugs and booze. Now, I've never faulted wrestlers for having prescription drug addictions because of the way wrestling takes its toll on their body. So I'm sympathetic to wrestlers who get hooked on prescription pills. But wrestlers who are drinking, or if you're hooked on crack, cocaine, or heroin or something like that, I have no sympathy for you. If you're hooked on those things, I only have sympathy if you have a prescription drug addiction. You will have my sympathy. Any wrestlers hooked on other things can fuck off. So anyway, as long as you had prescription, it was legally okay. But morally, it wasn't, because they'd have doctors write them whatever they wanted. Because this is before they started cracking down on drugs. This is 2002. This happened. It wouldn't be until around 2007 that they would finally start cracking down on this shit. They also had halcyons, which are things that they took sometimes just to go to sleep for a long period of time. They would also use them for ribs too. Now, you already know how I feel about ribs from the last week's episode, but it's about to get deeper here. They would mix the halcyons with alcohol and call them H-bombs or H-bombing. They'd slip it in to make someone pass out, and they would shave their head, draw dicks on their bodies or whatever. And sometimes they would do it to girls. RVD said this was normal in some of the places that he'd been. Now, let me break this down for you guys. Shaving someone's head when they're passed out. not okay. Roofing someone's drink, man or woman, not okay. Drawing dicks on their bodies, that's fine. That's the only thing that I condone out of this whole thing. Okay, you drew a dick on somebody's body, fine. That's fine. That's not going to leave a long-lasting damage, and you can fuck with somebody like that. That's funny. Drawing dicks is funny. Shaving someone's head, not fucking funny. Roofing a drink, not fucking funny. Now, if they fall asleep naturally and you draw dicks on them, go ahead. But H-bombing, not cool. Roofing girls, not fucking cool either. This is some Bill Cosby level shit. And the fact that the guys thought this was okay makes me lose a lot of respect for a lot of the boys in the business. Now, never leave your drink exposed, because the boys think seeing somebody frothing at the mouth and slurring their speech and they can't stand up and manage their own faculties is funny. They think this is funny. It's not funny, but they think it is. Now, Michael Hayes was one of the guys to get H-bombed. Bradshaw got split open by X-Pac the night of the pay-per-view. As Bradshaw is sleeping, Michael Hayes just knocked him in his head and reopened the wound. JBL ends up bleeding all over his shirt, so he slapped Michael Hayes and knocked him out. X-Pac wanted to get revenge on Michael Hayes for burying him in booking meetings, so he chopped off his ponytail. X-Pac was nicknamed the Trailer Hitch because he always followed the big load of Hall and Nash. He wanted to be taken seriously as a main event guy, but never was. Now, let me just say this. Michael Hayes knocking out Bradshaw was unnecessary. Bradshaw had every right to give Michael Hayes a receipt and slap him. X-Pac was completely in the wrong for cutting off his ponytail. First of all, you don't fuck with somebody's hair like that. Second of all, X-Pac was never a main event guy. He was always hitched to Hall and Nash. That's the only reason he got inducted with the NWO in 2020. Because X-Pac was not that big of an NWO member. He was only big in the NWO in the beginning in WCW because, you know, he went to WWE and he had to be hitched to Hall and Nash. And, again, because Hall and Nash were in the NWO when Hogan was no longer part of it in 2002, X-Pac got hooked on there to try to grow the NWO a little bit. But X-Pac never really belonged in the NWO. Now, when he got inducted as a member of DX, I supported that 100% because he was a better focal point for DX than he was the NWO. But he's never going in by himself because he was never a main event guy. He wasn't that good. He just wasn't. He was a great worker. He had a decent personality, but he was never going to be a top guy. He didn't have the size or the believability. It wasn't going to work for X-Pac. It just wasn't. He was the comedy relief in DX. That's a fact. He very rarely got aggressive. And they tried to give him his own faction with the X Factor, but it was a jobber faction at best. It was like the original 3MB. It wasn't taken seriously. So I'm sorry. X-Pac felt that way, but he wasn't a main event guy. Now, never sleep on a flight full of wrestlers. That's a lesson to be learned here. You will end up with a shaved eyebrow. Mike Chioda would wear a hat and sunglasses on flights at all times because he didn't know who was coming by him with shaving cream. If somebody went to lift your shades up, you at least had a chance of waking up. Now me, I'm staying awake the whole fucking flight, but I'm putting sunglasses on and the hat just to make sure nobody fucks with me. But I'm not sleeping on the plane. I will wait till I get back to my hotel room before I pass the fuck out. And I'm locking the fucking door. Especially if I have my own room. So, he took a gamble going to sleep. I would never fall asleep on a flight full of wrestlers. Especially after hearing this story. The wrestlers stayed vigilant for any potential pranks, while at the same time being on a flight with one of the industry's most legendary prankers, Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig. Once he came back to WWE, ribs started happening again in the locker rooms. His main target was Brock Lesnar, because he was a new guy. On the plane, Brock was sitting in his chair, and Kurt Hennig put shaving cream on his head, and he went flat on his head. Brock then starts full sprint chasing Kurt through the plane, and then swoops him up and slammed him into one row where a bunch of guys had to move. They went from one side of the fuselage to the other, and overhead bins got broken, and tables got broken, and armrests got broken up. The seats, the middle seat came completely off. Now, At one point, Curt Hennig took Brock Lesnar down in this fight. And the reason is because if you heard Curt Hennig in his early days in TNA, he would say, I took down Brock Lesnar at 35,000 feet. And that was like the version of like when Paul Heyman would say, my client, Brock Lesnar, conquered the Undertaker's undefeated streak at WrestleMania. Like, remember when Paul Heyman would say that for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks? That's kind of what Curt Hennig did with this phrase. Don't forget, I took down Brock Lesnar at 35,000 feet. That's what he was referring to, the plane ride from hell. Now, Heidi says there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop these two men. One of the wrestlers grabbed the PA system in the middle of the flight. Someone yells throughout the plane, we're going to die. We're all going to die. Now, one of the pilots comes to the back of the plane. He can't stop it. Finally, Jim Ross is called to the back to try and stop it. Why? Because he's the vice president of talent relations. Eventually, they hit the emergency room door, and that's when everyone finally stops the fight. Now, they weren't strong enough to pop the door, but they could have broke the fuselage, which could have caused the plane to depressurize, and then they would have to do an emergency landing. And there's nowhere to land because they were currently over the Atlantic fucking Ocean. That's how fucking dumb they are. Now, at the time this happened, Brock was still a rookie in the business, and Terry mentioned he exposed himself to her at the pay-per-view. Terry was there that night doing backstage interviews. She was backstage, and she heard her name called, and she goes into her room where Brock and Goldust are. Brock opens his towel and shows Terry his dick. Terry no-sold it. Went to her dressing room, and Dustin went with her and said, don't sell it. And Terry was like, I'm not going to. Now, Darkside of the Ring attempted to reach Brock for comment, but he never returned their calls. Now, let me just say this. Out of all the crazy shit that's talked about in this episode, Brock showing Terry his dick is the least of everyone's fucking problems. And also, it's not that bad. Because it's not like, because there's another dick showing moment that happens in here that's way worse. So that's the point I'm trying to make. But there's a big difference between Brock Lesnar just going, hey, and showing off his dick, and Ric Flair doing what he did later on in the series. I'm kind of jumping around here, but what Ric Flair did to Heidi involving his dick was way worse than Brock just going, hey, there's my dick. You can just go, oh my God, look away, and that's it. Brock was just being childish, and that's not a big deal. I don't care what anybody says. He didn't touch his dick. He didn't force Terry to touch his dick. He didn't pin Terry against the wall. All he did was show his towel and go, hey, there's my dick. Ah, da, da. That's it. Terry was able to leave. She was able to get away, and Brock never bothered her after that. Now, Jim Ross said he had heard of Brock's behavior, but nothing was reported to him. He says it very well could have happened, and he looked out for the talent to the best of his ability. But he can't follow everybody around to see if they're acting like an adult. That should not be his job. And it shouldn't. If something goes wrong, you have to report it. If you don't report what happens, nobody can discipline somebody if they don't know there's a problem. You have to speak. And you have to speak when it happens. Don't wait 2 weeks. Don't wait 2 months. Don't wait 2 fucking years. Speak the fuck up when it happens. I guarantee you, you have a better shot at people believing you when you report it now instead of waiting fucking weeks, months, or years. People are less likely to believe your story if you wait too long, especially when statute of limitations could eventually pass. So if something goes wrong, speak up immediately. Now, here's the catch. When you speak up, you may not get believed right away. And that's the reason for that. It's not because you're a woman. It's not because people think that you're lying. It's because they need to get all the facts together. They need to conduct their investigation, get everybody's side of the story, gather up any evidence if there's evidence. So if you can present evidence, whether it be video evidence, audio evidence, DNA evidence, if you got any of that, bring it. They can put it all together, get their story, and hopefully you will find your justice. But that's the best bet you got. And I know some people are going to say, well, when they're in an emotional state of mind, they don't think about those things. Well, now you're going to have to. Someone's got to sit you down and teach this shit because it's happening, apparently, allegedly, too many goddamn times. for people not to be sitting someone down and explaining this shit. Because otherwise, it's going to be an endless cycle that continues to happen. That's my 2 cents on that. Now, after the fight, they try to settle down because they have to do the TV the following day. Because after a pay-per-view, there's Monday Night Raw. They're flying to Hartford, Connecticut for Monday Night Raw. All of a sudden, Goldust grabs the PA and starts singing Pledging My Love by David Allan Coe. All of a sudden, everyone starts waking up, and Terry goes to stop him, but Paul Heyman says, don't sell it. So Terry sits back down. She says that's the smartest thing to do in the wrestling business. Now, when they say don't sell it, what they mean is don't let something bother you. That's what they mean. Like if somebody's trying to piss you off, it means let it go. Don't sell it. Don't let them know they're getting to you. Because then they're less likely to keep bothering you if you don't sell it. That's what that means. So, Dustin couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, which is why people got so mad. His singing was terrible. Now, apparently, Dustin was still hurting over the divorce from Terry. He still hadn't fully gotten over that. Finally, JR said, sit your ass down, go to sleep, and give us all a break. Because it was just getting to be goddamn ridiculous at this point. So Dustin finally sat down. Now, hours into the flight, the chaos shows no signs of slowing down. Heidi has an uncomfortable altercation with Ric Flair that made her very uncomfortable. This is the comparison I was trying to make earlier. She was in the galley, which is their little kitchen area on the plane. And it's like, once you're in that galley, you're like stuck in the back. Ric Flair walks to the galley to get a Coke. He refuses to leave after getting the Coke and had her back against the back door and she couldn't move or get away from him. And he started spinning his penis like a helicopter and wanting her to touch it. He eventually took her hand and put it on his penis. He kept her back there for a few minutes. She asked him to please stop, and he wouldn't. Eventually, Goldust got back on the PA and told Rick to leave Heidi alone. Now, this is why I say this is worse than what Brock Lesnar did. Like I said, what all Brock did was show his dick. Terry was in a wide open space. She had places to go. And when she wanted to leave, she left. Brock didn't chase after her. Brock didn't barricade the door. He let her leave. Rick had her backed against the wall and would not go away. That is disrespectful. Now, you can sit there with a girl and say, want her to touch it. If she says no, that's it. Now, first of all, you should never ask a random girl to touch your dick. That's just fucking stupid. But for the sake of argument, let's say you're the type of guy that does that. Let's say you pull your dick out and you ask the girl to touch it. If she says no, fucking leave. Now, if she says yes and wants to grab your dick, okay. There's no harm, no foul here. But if the girl's telling you to stop, fucking stop. If you don't stop, you are now officially sexually harassing this girl. Once someone asks you to stop and you say no, that's when this becomes harassment. Before that, it's a harmless joke. But once she says stop and you don't, that's where the line is now. And like I said, she's backed against the wall. She has nowhere to go. She can't get away from him. So Ric Flair in that moment was being an asshole. He was making her uncomfortable. And he was being a piece of shit. Now, sometimes as a joke, Ric Flair would put on his robe and not wear anything else and strut around like Ric Flair. And then open it up and go, woo! The guys loved it. That's why he did it. And he would move his hips and twirl his dick like a helicopter and spin the dick because he had a big enough dick to where he can do that. And if you know him, you know when to exit the party and go to your own safe space. Or if you don't know him, you find yourself in deep water. Now, the problem here is there was no safe space on the plane. There's only one place for the flight attendants to go, the galley. And Ric Flair interrupted that safe space. You had nowhere to go. You're on a plane. There's no option to leave the area. If you have an option to leave the area, that makes it a whole different story. But if you don't have an option, you are making someone uncomfortable. Now, Tommy Dreamer says, Ric Flair is not going to impose by force any sexual stuff on anybody. He's just flaunting, styling, and profiling and doing like the Ric Flair stuff where everybody's going to laugh about it. But obviously someone took offense to it. Yes, because she was backed into a corner, Tommy, and had nowhere to go. That's not strutting around the plane. How does he not know this? How does he not see this? This makes no fucking sense. What Tommy just said. Now, am I saying Ric Flair is a rapist? No. But he clearly was sexually harassing Heidi. This was definitely sexual harassment. I'm not going to call it sexual assault because there was no assault, but it was definitely sexual harassment. 100%. Now, Ric Flair has previously stated there is no truth to these allegations. Okay. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But assuming the story is true, Ric Flair is a sexual harassing piece of shit. Now, if Flair says that didn't happen, and it turns out it didn't happen, then obviously Heidi's telling a bullshit story. But from what I can gather from all the stories and all the data, Heidi's telling the truth. I believe she's telling the truth, just based on everything that I'm hearing. Now, like I said, do I know for sure 100% that she's telling the truth? No. But based on the evidence I'm seeing, sounds like she is. Anyway, Jim Ross said Scott Hall's issues are well documented, especially if you watch the resurrection of Jake the Snake Roberts. And they didn't do him any favors putting him back on the road. But they didn't know how bad it really was. People felt they should have, but you don't know until you see it and interact with it. So obviously Scott Hall hadn't really fully dealt with his demons yet. He was still kind of dealing with his issues. Heidi said they were close to landing, and she woke up Scott Hall to offer him breakfast. And he grabbed her shirt and pulled her down, and the buttons on her shirt ripped. And he told her what he was going to do to her. He said he was going to lick her and then try to do so. But then he passed out before he could do anything. After that, she stayed in the galley until the plane landed and the wrestlers left. They were mad because they wanted more foods and drinks, but she refused to serve them. Now, Scott Hall believes he was H-bombed by Mr. Perfect because he'd been taking pills and drinking for a lot of years at that point, and he was out. Scott claims to have no recollection of the events that took place on the flight. Now, if Scott Hall was in fact H-bombed, or he was pilled up and drunk off his ass, I'm willing to give him forgiveness. I'm willing to give a free pass here. Because obviously, it's not Scott Hall's normal behavior. And obviously, if somebody else H-bombed him, he was in the right state of mind. And like I said, he passed out before he could do anything. The worst thing that happened was he ripped the buttons on his shirt. So at worst, he should be paying for his uniform and stuff. And also, because she refused to serve them, I don't blame Heidi one bit. I would have stopped serving them a long time ago. Because they're all fucking piece of shit human beings. She didn't want to serve them because, again, they were fucking savages. This is the most fucked up thing I've ever seen. They treated this woman like absolute garbage. It made me sick listening to this. It really did. How do they call themselves men? Because they weren't. After spending 14 hours on the plane, the weary passengers and crew finally touched down on American soil. The plane was trashed. Blankets, pillows, drinks, cups, food was stepped on. So the whole plane is trashed up. And of course, the wrestlers aren't going to clean it up because they're spoiled. The flight attendants have to do all that stuff. Scott Hall wouldn't wake up, and everyone was worried he might be dead. Just Incredible put shades on him and did a Weekend at Bernie's style exit off the plane and got him wheeled through customs. JR was disgusted. Hey, at least Just Incredible looked out for him, so I'll give him credit for that. Michael Hayes woke up and finally noticed his ponytail was gone, and he was hell-bent to find out who did it. Don't blame him. If X-Pac thought he was getting buried before, he sure as shit's about to get buried now. Heidi and the crew started to clean the plane, and at one point found syringes. Doesn't surprise me. Heidi wanted to leave, but a supervisor made her clean the airplane. Now, I can understand the supervisor wanting Heidi to do her job, but after the trauma that Heidi went through, she should have been allowed to get off the plane. I would have brought in a different crew to clean that up. So her supervisor was a dick or a bitch, depending on whether it's a guy or a girl, for making her stay and clean the plane. She should have been allowed to leave. She didn't deserve to stay on that plane after all the hell she went through. Now, JR took responsibility and said it was a black eye on his career. But the thing about a black eye is you heal. So obviously, JR, once again, taking responsibility because he's in charge of the talent. It's also why when Ric Flair had that drunken moment during that 2K conference, he got fired because JR was the head of talent relations. He had to take he's responsible for the talent, whether he wants to or not. That's why that responsibility is hard to deal with and why eventually I don't blame him for wanting to eventually leave that job, and they turn it over to John Laurinaitis. I don't blame him. Who wants to be responsible for these fucking animals for that long when they clearly have no regard for anyone's feelings other than their own? Shortly after landing, Vince McMahon and Jim Ross urgently meet to discuss repercussions for the flight's most egregious acts. Vince was aware of what was going on, but it was JR's job to handle it. Vince makes decisions, but JR is the one who has to execute them, which is true. JR had to fire some people and didn't feel bad about it because Vince told him to do it. And he who writes the checks has the final say. And that's the truth. JR is the messenger boy. He does what Vince tells him to do because that's his boss. JR is not going to fire people for no reason. Because if JR fires somebody, but Vince was going to use him in a high-profile storyline, JR's fucked. That's why JR doesn't fire anybody unless Vince tells him to. If JR calls you to tell you you're fired, it's because Vince wanted you fired. Vince wanted you gone. And JR had to deliver the message. Now, Curt Hennig was the first to be fired. Vince had enough of ribs and pranks, and Curt was one of the greats, so he had to go. People hoped that one day Curt could come back, but he passed away not too far after that. So obviously Curt Hennig eventually passed away about a year later, but with all due respect to Curt Hennig, I don't blame Vince for wanting Curt fired, especially because the ribs started in the locker room once Curt Hennig came back. So in a way, he was the focal point of everything. He was the cause of a lot of things. So Curt Hennig being fired, totally okay with that. The next to be fired was Scott Hall. They felt he wasn't ready to get back on the road because of his demons. Now, I gotta say this. Obviously, this explained a lot because I always wondered why Scott Hall magically disappeared from TV. I didn't know about the plane ride from hell at the time it happened. I was following wrestling, but not that heavily. I wasn't reading dirt sheets or watching the news. I just watched TV every week. It wouldn't be until a few years later that I really started digging into the dirt sheets and things like that. So I wasn't really fully aware of that. But I will say this. I don't think Scott Hall deserved to be fired. What I think should have been done was, I think Scott Hall should have been taken off the road temporarily, but I would have gave Scott Hall a chance to go to rehab. I would have paid for his rehab if I was WWE. Like, hey, we'll give you a 30-day rehab, and if you come out and you're clean, we'll put you back on TV. I wouldn't have fired him that quickly because he's not going to be able to handle his demons by himself. It was obviously that was apparent because it would be another 10 years before he moved in with DDP, and he had to help him out. And he was drinking vodka for breakfast. So I don't think they should have I mean, obviously Scott Hall needed to be punished, but I don't think he deserved to be fired. I would have suspended him for 30 days and put him in rehab. Now, if he refused to go to rehab, then fire him. But I don't think Scott Hall was that big a stretch. Goldust was next to be fired. He was chewing snuff and using a seat back cushion as a spittoon. He said he had substance abuse problems. He clearly wasn't over the divorce from Terry, and we have to stop letting people's transgressions go without punishment. Again, do I think Goldust deserved to be fired? No. I mean, obviously he wasn't over the divorce from Terry. Still, here's what I would have done. I, again, would have gave him a 30-day suspension and tried to put him in rehab. And if he refused rehab, fire him. I also would have had him, during that suspension, go see psychiatric counseling. Go see a therapist. And deal with the divorce from Terry. Heal up from this. That's what I would have done. Now, the snuff and the seat back cushion, I would have fined him for that. So I would have fined him, suspended him, and put him in rehab, but I wouldn't have fired him. Unless he refused to go to rehab. But I would have tried to get help for Goldust, because I feel like outside of those things, for the most part, he's a pretty model employee. Especially when he was doing a gimmick that he clearly didn't enjoy doing anymore, but knew it was drawing him money. And he was doing pretty damn well with it. Him and Booker T had amazing chemistry together. Now, Ric Flair got a pass because he was a made man in the wrestling business. Here's where I have the biggest problem. Ric Flair, if anybody should have been fucking fired, it should have been Ric Flair. But of course, he's a Flair, which means that name carries a certain type of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Privilege? Yeah. For those of you who hear me call Charlotte Flair the queen of privilege, I think this, combined with her classless cunt-like behavior that she had leading up to Survivor Series and how she behaves in the locker room, you know, sometimes I get a little tired of being right. But once again, I'm fucking right. Everybody out there who thinks, oh, Vinny's just hates Charlotte Flair and that's why he says she's privileged. Here's your fucking evidence, ladies and gentlemen. Facts. These aren't even my opinion. These are fucking facts. Ric Flair has always been allowed to get away with shit. And clearly, his spoiled-like privilege has been passed down from to generation to generation. His daughter acts like she owns the fucking place, backstage. David Flair, for fuck's sake, got a victory over Buff Bagwell one time and was at one point the United States champion. And the sumbitch didn't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch. And they handed him a belt on a silver platter. It's ridiculous. In fact, the only member of the Flair family that got reprimanded for anything was Reed. Because Reed Flair had a drug problem. And because he failed a drug test, 2 of them, they didn't hire him in the WWE. And obviously Reed Flair died of a drug overdose, so I'm not going to give Reed Flair shit either, but Reed was, ironically, the only Flair to not have privilege. Everybody else had the wrestling business handed to them on a silver fucking platter. Fuck Ric Flair. Should have fired his ass. You want to use Kurt Hennig to make an example? Use the Nature Boy to make a fucking example. To let people know that his fucking shit won't be tolerated anymore. The one guy out of everyone who deserved to be fucking fired didn't get fired. But everyone wants to give him a free pass because he can style and profile and woo, and I can have a good match with anybody and make them look good, even though I do the same shit every week. You've seen one of my matches, you've seen them all. Woo! Limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing. Damn right he's stealing kisses because apparently nobody was giving him kisses. Fuck that. Anyway, Heidi later goes to her hotel room and cries in the shower. Normally, I would say it's a little over dramatic, but given she was on a 14-hour flight, I'll let that go. She then calls SportsJet. They said it was unfortunate what happened, but they should keep the story to themselves because they work with professional athletes and things happen on airplanes and they should respect the privacy of their clients. Yeah. Fuck SportsJet. Can I just say that right now? Fuck SportsJet. Fuck them. Fuck them all to death. Why do I say fuck them all to death? I'll tell you exactly why I say fuck them all to death. Because when one of your employees is sexually harassed, you need to make some repercussions and make that shit public. That is stupid. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if not just wrestlers, but athletes in general are going to behave like that, I wouldn't want their business. Yeah. You should respect the privacy of your clients. Unless your clients are doing illegal shit. What those wrestlers did on that flight was ungodly. It was the most unprofessional, unethical thing that I've seen happen on an airplane. You should be called out for horrible behavior. Now, if you're just laughing, joking, having fun on a plane, but you're not hurting anybody, then yes, respect the privacy of your clients. But when you're doing hurtful shit to people and you're causing a ruckus, it's not a privacy you should respect because they had no respect for you. They had no respect for your plane. They had no respect for your employees. They had no respect for your policies. So why the fuck are you showing them any respect in return? Respect is a two-way fucking street unless you're paying your dues and you're earning respect. That's one thing. But in a situation like this, if you can't respect my company, I'm not going to respect you. You want your privacy respected, you damn well better respect me. Or I'll disclose every fucking thing. I don't care if I go to court. I don't care if I get sued. I almost say the same thing that most people say. Sue me for what? Heidi and another attendant filed lawsuits with the WWE, as well they should. They later agreed to a settlement. Her husband wanted her to take it because he wanted to protect their daughter from negative PR. Okay? I can somewhat see that. You know, wanting to protect their daughter from negative PR and not wanting Heidi to be somebody that's bashing the WWE. But again, if they behave this way, go for the money. Now, if the settlement's a good amount of money, then okay, take it. But in general, I would have kept prosecuting. That settlement, it's hard to take a settlement, but sometimes when you have a family to support and you want to protect them, sometimes the settlement's the right way to go. But that's how I feel. Tommy Dreamer felt that if she was truly violated and taking the money was buying her silence and making her feel more guilty, that she shouldn't have taken a payout and went to the fullest extent of law to then truly put this heinous person in jail. My opinion. Now, to an extent, I agree with Tommy Dreamer. But with Heidi, I can understand her wanting to protect her family or her husband wanting to protect their daughter. I get that. Now, after an exhausting European tour, Wrestlers and Management report for a live taping of Monday Night Raw a mere 24 hours after the plane touched down in Connecticut. JR found Michael Hayes' ponytail in a sandwich bag that was taped to the locker room door. JR took it down and threw it away. Exposure of these scandalous events would mark a turning point for the WWE, propelling it to rein in the public antics of its performers. In a symbolic twist of fate, the aftermath of the infamous plane ride from hell coincided on the same day the company was legally forced to rebrand its identity from the WWF to the WWE. That was when they lost the lawsuit with the World Wildlife Fund, which is why I will never donate any money to their cause. That is one charity that will never get a penny of my money. Because they're stupid, they're petty, and even with the WWF logo, people still think they're the World Wrestling Federation. So they can go fuck themselves. Young talents coming into the business after that era had heard all the stories, saw the remnants, saw guys that made millions of dollars not have two quarters to rub together. JR believes they learned from their predecessors. They gotten smartened up and behave a lot differently today. Hallelujah. RBD says you shouldn't meet your heroes. Some of these guys are freaks. Ain't that the fucking truth? Tommy feels like this is trying to portray someone as a sexual predator, and it's not. It's a joke. It's a gag. And today, 1000% inappropriate. My hairstyle is inappropriate right now. I am somehow offending someone right now with my double ponytail. How dare I have two ponytails? My answer is I'm 50 years old and I'm happy I have hair. But if you're asking me, I've hung out with Ric Flair. I've never seen him try to force his will against anybody. Now, again, here's what I want to say before I get to the last part of this. I agree with what Tommy Dreamer is saying. The problem is how he looked on this show. Because Tommy Dreamer, apparently, when he was doing this interview, he thought Heidi was going to be this uptight snowflake who was going to take miscellaneous things and make them seem like, oh my God, I'm being raped. Because there are some people in the Me Too movement who are actually victims, and there are some people in the Me Too movement who are just over-dramatizing stupid shit. That's why the Me Too movement got so out of fucking control to the point where it's goddamn ridiculous. So I get why Tommy feels that way. The problem is Heidi is not that type of person. She's very sweet. She's very kind. And she's able to rationally look at this incident and all that happened to her, which I'm going to get to in just a minute. But Tommy Dreamer, again, is true. Today, the way they behaved back then today is inappropriate. But we can't get mad at these guys for behaving the way they did back then, because back then it was a different time. People behaved differently in the early 2000s, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 60s. There were different behaviors then than there are now. That's why you can't get mad at somebody for how they behaved 10, 20 years ago unless they're still behaving like they did 10, 20 years ago. Because as human beings, we grow, we evolve, we become different people. The Vinny Bucci sitting in this chair right now is different than the one that was 10, 20 years ago. Right now, currently, I'm 34. I'll be 35 in March. 34-year-old Vinny is different than 24-year-old Vinny, who is different than 14-year-old Vinny, who is definitely different than 4-year-old Vinny. At the age of 4, I was a way different person than I was when I was 14. And then I turned 24. And now I'm 34. And trust me, in my 20s and my teenage years, I've done a lot of dumb shit. Some of it's funny, some of it's not. But at the age of 34, believe it or not, even though I do have a little bit of immaturity in me, I'm a lot more mature now than I was then. Now, granted, I've never done sexual assault on anybody in any of those eras, but I'm just saying my behavior as a normal human being has changed. So as long as everybody else is growing up, it's different. The reason I give Ric Flair a lot of shit is because he never grew up. Probably never will. He's still trying to be the nature boy, and he's like in his 60s, 70s. Like, at some point, you gotta be a fucking adult, and Flair's not capable of that. Because he's a horseman. Woo! Fuck him. Anyway, Heidi said she doesn't feel that his intent was to rape her, but what he did was wrong. She wasn't comfortable at first to come on the show because she's just telling her story, and everyone gets to nitpick all the things they think she did wrong. But if it gets someone to feel comfortable about coming forward or makes someone realize they did something inappropriate and do better, then she would have this conversation 25 times again. Now, I forgot to mention one thing about the Tommy Dreamer thing. I'm going to jump into that right now. Because of Tommy Dreamer's behavior in this episode, he lost his job at Impact Wrestling. Do I think he deserved to lose his job? No, not at all. I don't think he deserved to lose his job. But I will say this. Because of all the controversy that's come out since this episode has aired, with Tommy Dreamer losing his job, Ric Flair's got negative publicity, I'm worried about whether or not there's going to be a season 4 of Darkside of the Ring. Because I think people are going to be afraid to be interviewed and talk about their past. Because even though they're different people now, they don't want their past to ruin their present. So this could very well be the final season of Darkside of the Ring. Unless they try to go for different stories that people are comfortable talking about. Because, you know, people aren't going to be comfortable talking about their past if it's going to come back to haunt them. That being said, here's why I have respect for Heidi, was this last paragraph here. Because she said, Ric Flair was not trying to rape me. It wasn't that extreme. But he was still wrong for what he did. And that's the truth. Ric Flair did not want to rape Heidi. He's not a rapist. But it was still inappropriate of him to back her into a corner and make her touch his dick. He deserved repercussions for that. But he should not be called a rapist. Because he's not one. Now, did Ric Flair sexually harass Heidi? Yes. That's what Ric Flair should be charged with. Sexual harassment. He didn't assault anybody. He didn't rape anybody. But he did harass her in a sexual way. And he was wrong for doing so. And should have been reprimanded. Now, she said that she's afraid about people nitpicking all the things they think she did wrong. That's the only thing I don't feel sorry for Heidi over. Because I'm sorry, but that comes with the territory of telling a story. Because that's the type of person I am. When I hear a story, I try to look for things that don't make sense to me. If details don't add up, if something sounds suspect to me, I'm going to say it. That's why I'm controversial. That's why a lot of people get offended by shit I say. Because I don't blindly follow every story that I hear. I look for things that don't make sense. But here's the type of person I am. If I have a question about something, I'm going to ask it. I ask questions. I question everything. But here's where I'm fair. If I ask you a question that sounds suspect to me, and you give me a logical answer that makes sense, I back off. But if you give me an answer that doesn't have logic or doesn't make sense, I'm not going to believe you. And I'm going to keep asking questions. Because shit don't make sense to me. All you have to do, if you want me to be on your side, is make it make sense. That's all you got to do. But if you get defensive, and you get bitchy, and you get angry, this is man or woman, if I ask you a question and your first thought is to get defensive or say I'm an asshole, then automatically I believe you're lying, because I'm like, what are you hiding if you don't want to tell me the truth? If it's the truth, tell me. Let's have a conversation. But I also love the fact that she said she not only wants to make people comfortable about coming forward, but also wants people that if they realize they did something wrong, to do better. So she's on both sides of the spectrum. That's the right way to answer this question. Because there are some people who might be doing something inappropriate, but don't realize they did anything because nobody said anything. The best example of this is Aziz Ansari. When he was making out with that girl and they had sex, but she was uncomfortable, and she mentioned later in a tweet that she was uncomfortable. And Aziz said, "Oh my God, I didn't know. You didn't say anything. I thought we were having fun, but I'm so sorry I made you feel that way." That's the right way to handle that. Aziz handled it the right way. If a guy is doing something to you that you think is inappropriate, 9 times out of 10, if you tell us, we'll stop. Most good men, the last thing we want to do is make a woman feel uncomfortable. Like sometimes we do things like put our arms around your shoulder or hold your hand or maybe do some type of sexual thing because we're getting the vibe that maybe things are going in that direction. But if you just tell us, hey, don't do that, I don't like that, I'm not into that, 9 times out of 10, the guy's going to say, hey, I'm sorry, I misread the situation, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, I apologize. And guess what? Done. Right there. You don't got to freak out. You don't got to see a therapist. You don't got to call 911. You don't got to blow a whistle. Just end right there. That's it. That's all you got to do. Now, of course, there's that 1 out of 10 times where the guy's going to keep groping and being inappropriate, and that's when you blow the whistle. That's when you kick the guy in the nuts. That's when you can go tweet and say this guy's a pig because he's actually being a pig. But that's why I respect Heidi. She just wants people to come forward with being harassed, and if you and the people who've made those mistakes and didn't realize it, do better. And that's what all you can do as a society is do better and call things out when they happen. Don't wait weeks, months, or years. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll wrap up this week's episode of Darkside of the Ring. I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys tune in next week. We're going to have a great episode for you guys. Hopefully, the team will be back. I'm expecting Elvis and Gator to be here for next week's episode. And next week's episode is going to be the double life of Chris Kanyon. Now, I know I'm saying next week, but I'm hoping it'll be next week. If not, it'll be coming soon. Will be the double life of Chris Kanyon. And I look forward to talking about that. So make sure you guys follow the Boochcast. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified here on YouTube so you never miss another episode of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring, as well as other additional Boochcast YouTube content. Also, make sure you guys follow the Boochcast. We're on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, and Google Podcasts. Links are down in the description box below. Also, like us on Facebook. Link is down in the description box below. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. Links are down in the description box below. And you can support the Boochcast by going to anchor.fm/theboochcast/support. The link is down in the description box below. Click them, join them. Let's have some fun. And like I said, when it comes to supporting the Boochcast, you guys know the spiel by now. I ain't got to share it. I'll talk to you guys next time. Until then, pizza, baby.